Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and Mike have both been recently to some trade shows, to some conferences, and that's what we're going to talk about today, how to be effective and get a return on your investment when you participate in a trade show. So welcome back, Mike and Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. It's nice to be back in Arizona where it's a little bit warmer, though we are hitting our cooler weather. But it's good to see the sun again. I was just up in your neck of the woods, actually, a couple of weekends ago in Seattle, and it managed to rain quite a bit while I was up there. So it's good to be back here. I know you got to go down to Florida, so you kind of got the better deal on that one.
I don't know about the better deal. You go down there and you get to deal with a little bit of humidity. I'd take the drier. Well, I guess it wasn't dry.
No, it wasn't a dry rain. It was a legit rain.
They don't have a dry rain?
No, and in fact, it sucked because they time it so that while you're walking from your hotel to the conference center, it actually rains every time. So it's amazing how that happens. Where you peek your head out the window, it's like, oh, it looks like it's good. Let's start walking. And halfway to the convention center, it's raining like crazy.
I'm envisioning one of those cartoons or comic strips where the cloud just follows you around. Is that
it felt like that, actually. No, and even better than that, well, I don't want to get distracted, but the building was under construction next to us, and it had a spotlight on the third floor or whatever it is they're renovating. It was right outside my window, and at night I kept looking out. It was when they had that super intense moon a couple weeks ago. I looked out the window, and it was about 3 a.m, and all I could see, because I had my glasses on, all I see is this bright light outside my window. And I thought, man, they weren't kidding when they said this moon was going to be the brightest dang moon we've ever seen. And I remember about an hour and a half later waking up again, and it's still there. And I thought, and it's not even moving. It didn't dawn on me until it was light out, and it was just a security light. But so I was pretty excited about the bright moon. But anyhow, the rain sucked, the light sucked. Trade shows, being on your feet, that can suck. And I think that's what we're going to talk about today is trade shows.
I think the last time you were in Seattle, or we were both in Seattle at the same time, it was when we had a conference, first meeting that we had as a group. And if I remember right, Mike brought a picture of a set of handcuffs that were sitting outside of his hotel room.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, somebody left a souvenir behind. And yeah, it was they were cool, too, because they had like about a 2-foot chain on them. They're pretty handy. I left him there. I didn't take him. In retrospect, I probably should have grabbed him. But anyhow.
But the memory's still here.
Yeah, you can't beat business travel. You can't beat trade conferences. The stories, I mean, between Mike and I don't know how many hundreds of conferences we've been to over the years. I mean, I've been doing trade shows and events for better than 25 years. And it's funny because some of the best stories out of your sales career will probably, good or bad, will probably come from conference attendance. And some of them are funny stories, after-hour stories, the typical tchotchke stories, stuff like that. But anyhow, what we want to talk about was something that I really hadn't thought about. When we started recording these sessions, one of the things that really never came to mind, for me at least, was how you present your company at a trade show as a sales professional, how you represent your company, where you devote your time, what you should do and shouldn't do. And I really didn't think about it because we really, from a sales perspective, we really got out of the trade show investment several years ago. We just didn't find that we were getting the return on investment, and we weren't in a high growth company where we were building a brand and things like that. What we ended up doing is spending a lot of money to go to events to see customers that would stop by and say hi, but we weren't really seeing growth and it really wasn't adding value. So we stopped doing them. But then in the last year or so, and since we started working for early stage companies and companies that do need to do that activity and invest in trade shows, Mike and I have thrown our hats in the ring to attend these events and see customers and participate with these teams that we work with. And it wasn't until I went to Seattle where I thought we should probably talk about that, because I saw a lot of things that I would probably do differently or that I would think about if I was going to invest 2.5 or 3 days standing on a trade show floor, just some basic stuff that maybe I take for granted just because I've been doing this for a while.
So there's a right way and a wrong way to do this, like most things. And usually when I think of the right way or wrong way to do different things, I start to think about what perspective am I coming after this from? So when we talk about perspective, I guess the first perspective is from the company's perspective. If I decide to invest in a trade show and I'm going to plant my flag at an event, what are some things that you should be thinking about from an organization perspective?
So obviously you're going to want to understand who the audience is. You're going to want to understand what role will you play in the event, right? So you can just show up at an event that's not aligned with what you do, but ideally you'd want to be in front of your prospective target customer. Right?
Yeah. So you go to a trade show either to gather information about a market or share information about what your company does inside a market. So when I think about trade shows, I think about a couple of different things. What are the major themes of the event? Who are the people who are going to be participating in the event? What type of time will I have to engage with folks? Is most of my engagement going to be on the show floor? Many times when you register for a show and you're sponsoring a show, you're put in an expo hall and you don't have access to the general sessions that are happening at an event. There are other times where you can sponsor speaking sessions and actually present some of the capabilities or the story that your organization is trying to present in the context of addressing a real world problem within the audience that you're going after. So for me, when I think of doing trade shows successfully or participating in trade shows successfully, it's how well we can integrate our story into the major themes of that trade show so that when people come in and listen to what's being presented, they're gathering information rather than sitting through a product pitch.
It's just dawned on me. We were thinking about this from two different perspectives. You were thinking about it from a much broader perspective of the strategic value of attending an event, investing in an event, doing more than just doing trade show booth duty. And the problem is I just came out of 2 or 3 days in Seattle in the rain where I did said booth duty. So the only thing I can think of about trade shows is how to either do the booth right or completely screw it up. So my apologies there because now we're on the same page. I had to remove myself from the booth, which was not easy to do because I also did not have the extra cushy carpet because the marketing manager that set up the booth didn't think it was worth the $300. So we were standing on basically the concrete.
Well, and I know many times when we participate in trade shows in the past, you've been there as the booth babe.
I actually signed an email that way with somebody, and they thought that was pretty accurate. So just for what it's worth, it worked.
I'm not surprised. So getting back to the piece of we're in the expo hall. So what are some of the things that you should be doing when you're in the expo hall in order to make the best use of your time?
Yeah, so let's start with party fouls, things you just absolutely should not do, and that I saw various vendors and maybe some of the people that surrounded my media area, the area where I was standing. A couple things. One is I was amazed by the amount of food, beverage, and trash that people would have sitting on their tables inside their booth. And it would drive me nuts to see people walking by and they see partially eaten lunches or the lunch boxes and stuff just everywhere. And so the first thing I'd say is keep a nice, clean booth and don't have a bunch of food sitting around.
Especially that last day of the conference when everybody's trying to get home, so everybody has their carry-on baggage or carry-on bags inside the booth, which in a 10 by 10 booth or a 5 by 10 booth can end up taking up 20 to 30% of the booth.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because we had that situation where a lot of people thought, oh, I don't want to take my coat or my luggage down to the coat check. And we actually had everybody do that because everybody was stacking their luggage underneath the table with a skirt then now protruding out by about 2 feet because the suitcase weren't fitting under the table. So we did fix that problem. You need to definitely not overload your space with luggage. So that's a good one, even if you have to wait in line.
Another one that drives me nuts is when right as you go into the booth, first thing that they want to talk to you about is their product. Here's our product. What's your familiarity with our product? And sometimes it's not even a question. It's just they drive right into that feature functionality pitch, or they're more focused on scanning your badge than actually gathering information from you. So when we talk about best practices, one of the things we really try to get our teams thinking about, what are the questions that you need to ask the participant at that expo hall in order to qualify them properly? Like, you can usually see their badge, who they are. You can see what organization they're a part of. And you don't necessarily want to become a badge watcher, but asking some simple questions like, what brings you to the conference? Why are you attending? What are you getting out of the conference so far? Then getting into what's your familiarity about the business and starting to get the person comfortable with sharing information with you.
Yeah, you bring one of the things, you just hit one of my pet peeves too, is the badge scanning. I think there's a badge scanning etiquette that you need to really think about. And this happened to me at not this last Dreamforce, but 2 years ago at Dreamforce, I was kind of milling around the vendor area and talking to companies that either we do business with or that we were getting ready to partner with. And I can remember to this day, a guy coming up to me in a booth. They had a product. I had no idea what it was or if I'd be interested. And he came up and he lifted my badge up and he went to scan it. And I pulled it out of his hand and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm just scanning your badge." And I said, "Well, why? Why would you scan my badge?" And he said, "Well, we're just scanning everybody's badges." And I said, "Okay, well, same question. Why are you scanning my badge? Why do you care about having me scanned into your database?" And he got really upset with me. It was like an accepted norm that if you walk by my booth, you're going to get scanned. And what I explained to him was, I said, it's not going to add any value for you or me if you scan my badge. I have no interest in what you're doing, and you've gotten us off to an awkward start. So I felt kind of, I think violated is a strong word, but it's just kind of like you reach a point in time where you've demonstrated enough value in talking to somebody, and you can tell that what you do is interesting to them, and it makes sense that there would be a next step. And I think a lot of people at trade shows are afraid that the next step is now I'm going to get a spam email from every vendor that I stopped by and got scanned by. And now people are like scan resistant. But if you get to the point where you've had a good conversation, there's mutual interest in what you do, you solve a problem that's relevant to that person, it's a next logical step because they understand, well, yeah, I want this person to be able to get a hold of me. Therefore, scanning my badge makes a lot of sense. But if you just do random scannings, and if you have, I know that Mike and I in our past lives, we had a marketing VP that she measured the success of her team by how many scans our sales reps could get in a booth. And that was the single metric. And it just drove me nuts because we could give her 2,000 scans, but we had no context around the names, why they stopped by, why they would find it interesting to hear from us again. And I think that would be the one thing that I still see a lot of sales reps do is get into scan, just that scan mode without context. And I think it's a horrible message you're sending to people that are stopping by your booth.
So what about lessons learned on capturing data? So you talk about context, you talk about scans. What do you see that works well when it comes to capturing contact information at an expo hall like this?
Yeah, so I like the scanners because you can, not only will you get the information that person's provided to the venue, but you can also type notes into that. So, if you think back in time, and unfortunately, I would have said I was thinking back in time 5 or 10 years by saying what you do is get a fishbowl and you get business cards and people write their notes on their business cards and then you put them in the bowl and then you have a drawing that may or may not occur at a later date. And then you go through this pile of business cards. And that's the way we used to do it a long time ago. I still see people doing that today. And the problem with that is now you're writing all these crib notes on business cards. You're throwing them in a bowl. They don't, you lose the context of a lot of the notes that get written. If you have multiple people taking different kinds of crib notes, the information it gets lost in translation. And it also requires a manual step of now going through a bunch of business cards, scanning the cards, putting them into your database, transferring the notes because those aren't going to scan. So now you're typing in a bunch of notes. It's just it's an exercise that's just so time consuming where you could just have that scanner type the notes into each scan. And then when you get the CSV file from the show promoter, then you've got all the information with your notes in a file that you can just upload into your CRM application.
So, yeah, and another way to do this that gets away from the scanning, and I see the value in scanning, and I think that's a great way to capture a lot of information. But when you're SaaS product, if you've got a registration page that you can funnel people through so you can get them to register in the booth, that becomes a really good source for information as well. It's about getting them registered in the platform. Many times it's first name, last name, email address, maybe organization information, but having a landing page specific for an individual event allows you to keep that data organized, but it also gets people exposed to a platform. So if you're in that scenario, that becomes another great way to gather that kind of information.
Yeah, I agree, because we did experience that this year at Dreamforce, we happened to be working with a group that had a product like that, where they were very interested in the platform and the product itself. And the first step to participating and learning about it was to actually register. And so we spent basically 3 or 4 days with just lines and lines of people that were really interested in learning more, and they wanted to take part in it. And just the act of going through and seeing the product, they registered, and they did so knowing that that's what they were doing. And so it wasn't like this separate event, right? It was part of the onboarding process. It was part of the experience of the product, and nobody felt like, oh, you just tricked me into getting my email. I'm willing to give that to you because I want to see more about this product. So yeah, if you can do that, that's by far, whether that be setting up test accounts, demo accounts, trial accounts, whatever, that's absolutely the best way.
So another pet peeve of mine at events like this is when you've got a group of people. Let's say you've got a large booth. You're investing 6 figures, maybe even 7 figures in an event. So you might have 20, 30, 40 people on your team who are participating. You've got a large number of people who are at the expo hall. And then when they break for lunch, every rep goes to lunch and sits at the same table. And you miss that opportunity to interact with the audience in a more social setting. So my point here is spread out. When you go to lunch, spread out, use that as another way to engage with everybody who's at the event. Remember, the people who are at this event ideally are people who are interested in the thing that you're delivering out to the marketplace. That's why you chose to go there as a company. So if it's an event like the learning event that I was at a couple of weeks ago, you're talking to people who are passionate about a certain concept. And in this one, it was around innovation and learning. So every conversation that you have with someone at a lunch table related to innovation and learning is something that everybody can get engaged in. You can't have that conversation if the 8 chairs are filled up by 7 other people from inside your organization.
Yeah, and that kind of relates to another thing too that I would see a lot, which is sales reps really talking to each other quite a bit. And I asked the question with one of the events I was at recently. I said, are you guys going to buy this solution from each other, or what's the value in just sitting around and talking to each other? Because as far as I can tell, you're probably not going to make too many sales to each other, and you already know the product and everything else. So like maybe we should be talking to people that are walking by here half interested, that have a perception that, you have a close circle of people that work there that really aren't looking to engage in conversation. So I think making sure that you make the most of that time that you're in that booth to engage with people, and that doesn't mean pounce on people when they're walking by, but at the same time, you want to engage in conversation. And the beauty of a trade event, and the reason that I really do like to go to events, even though I've been to a ton of them, is that that's the one time when that's the only thing that person's thinking about. They're there to learn. They want to figure out how to solve a problem or make an improvement in their business. They're not distracted with email and everything else that happens while they're at the office doing their day-to-day job. And it's the one chance you have to really make an impression without those distractions. So make the most of it, and don't kind of send the message that you're too busy talking to your peers or whatever to have them bother you.
So, Mike, anything else on the individual side, like in the expo hall, and best practices on that end?
The only other thing was, I would say that I stopped doing tchotchkes a long time ago. One of the things I noticed, 2 things that noticed me that really surprised me. One is that the term booth babe, I don't mean to be derogatory, because it could be a female or male or whatever. But the idea that you prop somebody up in your booth that is attractive, that is just intended to be some sort of focal point in your booth, I still see that at events, and it just amazes me because I don't know where that adds value. But the second thing is, and maybe this will tie into a broader conversation, but the post-event follow-up. If somebody goes to your booth and they hand you their business card and they say, I'd really like to follow up with you next week to talk about a demo or next steps or expand our conversation, make sure that happens. Because I've seen this happen in so many cases where you spend the time and energy to go to the events, you centralize the data, and that next experience that customer has is an automated email from one of your marketing automation systems that says, howdy, thanks for stopping by the booth. Glad to meet you. We'll be in touch soon. And to me, if you've had a person come to your booth, you've had a one-on-one conversation, and you've talked about next steps, that should not be the next thing that they get. What they should get is a personal message from you, or a call, or something that says, I listened to you. The time you spent with me was well spent, and let's talk about steps going forward. If all they get is an automated email out of your system, they're going to feel like they're one of 10,000 people you probably scanned that week, and they'll probably lose a lot of faith in how much time they're going to want to invest with you in the future. And then when it's important to you, you'll find that they're not as responsive. Like they were really gung-ho at the show, but now they don't want to call us back. You may have missed your opportunity. So I guess that's a long answer for do what you say you're going to do, follow up, and if you can, define the next steps and make sure you deliver on that. Do what you say you're going to do.
So another perspective to take is the perspective from an organization. So let's say I'm an organization, I'm getting ready to invest in a show, I'm putting together plans for 2017. Where do I start? How do I look at this? And from my perspective, one of the things I like to do is get a sense for who traditionally has attended those events. And none of this is really novel, but I like to look at who's attended the event before, who has sponsored the event before, what are there speakers who tend to participate in that event year after year after year? What are the things that those speakers are known for? And this helps me get a better understanding of the theme of the conference and the type of people who are going to attend. And then from there, I look at, for that particular event, I want to also find out if they've published the themes for the year. If they have published themes for the year, are there individual themes that we can align to and maybe get a subject matter expert that we know of inside our network to participate and speak at the event? So now we sponsor that person or suggest that that person go and speak at the event. The reason I like to take this approach is it becomes a great way for you to transfer valuable information to a captive audience and have 40 to 60 to a couple hundred people engage in a direct conversation. And the number of business cards that you get at the end of that event from people who are attending as participants who want to follow up with you or hear more about how you've applied this in your organization or hear more about how you're doing X is awesome. And for me, that's a more successful approach than hanging around a booth waiting for people to come by. I'm going out and delivering information to that audience.
Well, thank you, Mike. And Mike, you two sure have a lot of experience at trade shows and good stories and good insight into what makes it worth it to be there and how to get the most out of it. I think seeing a lot of different booths and participating in booths and really on both sides of it allows you to give good insight into what works and what doesn't if you're taking the time to be there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale podcast. You can find out more at catalystsale.com or follow us on Twitter at Catalyst Sale. Thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale podcast.